Born March 2nd, 1791, Philippe Schmerling grew up to become a medical doctor. Despite serving as a physician in the Dutch army from 1812 to 1816, Schmerling had other interests. In 1829, Schmerling, who some now consider the father of paleontology, excavated a Belgian cave and discovered fossil remains of an ancient modern human. Named Angus II, these remains consisted of a fragmented cranium belonging to a 2 to 3-year-old child. Fast forward 27 years to 1856 in Neander Valley, Germany, and you'd find limestone quarry miners uncovering an old skull cap, arm bones, ribs, and a scapula. Having enough curiosity, the miners handed these remains to a local teacher, who then gave them to anatomist Hermann Schaffenhausen. Schaffenhausen would go on to scientifically describe these bones and recognize them as a unique species dubbed Homo Neanderthalensis. This emerging awareness of the existence of the new species would eventually drive researchers to comb museum collections and reanalyze fossil remains. In 1936, Angus II was reclassified as a Neanderthal child. This is just one example of the many twists and turns of the centuries-old exploration of Neanderthals. Today, we know Neanderthals inhabited large swaths of Eurasia over hundreds of thousands of years. But where did Neanderthals come from? The truth is, no one knows for sure, but the available evidence does give us a general idea. Neanderthal remains have never been found in Africa, but they have been found throughout Eurasia and especially Western Eurasia. They likely evolved in Western Europe. No one knows the exact species that Neanderthals or modern humans evolved from. Homo ancestor was a possible candidate until proteomic analysis suggested this hominin was likely a sister species of the last common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, rather than a direct ancestor. Homo heidelbergensis is a possibility, but when a fossilized cranium known as Broken Hill 1 was discovered in Zambia, Africa, it caused researchers to question heidelbergensis as a possible direct ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. That's because this skull was dated to about 300,000 years ago, and this species might be too young to be a Neanderthal ancestor. Welcome to Dawn of Sapiens, and the second entry in the Out of Africa series. In the first video, I explored the life history of Homo erectus outside of Africa. Erectus emerged in Africa, migrated into Eurasia, and persisted into the Middle Pleistocene in some areas. In this video, we turn to Homo Neanderthalensis. It amazes me at how much we know about Homo erectus, but poring over the available data on Neanderthals is staggering. When it comes to Neanderthals, we got DNA. When fossils and DNA are integrated, the lives of Neanderthals can be three-dimensionalized and explored in ways that just aren't possible for more archaic hominins. We don't know where or who Neanderthals came from, but DNA has helped to identify the earliest Neanderthal remains found. The Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain conceal a site known as Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones. In this pit lies the remains of at least 28 hominin individuals. Based on morphology, these individuals were initially classified as members of Homo heidelbergensis. But in 2015, researchers were able to sequence nuclear DNA from several of the bone fragments. They showed that the DNA was closer to Neanderthals than to both Homo sapiens and the mysterious Denisovans, which means that the Cima de los Huesos hominins were in fact Neanderthals, or at least ProtoNeanderthals. Because these individuals were dated at about 435,000 years old, they are the earliest Neanderthals ever identified. Despite this new evidence, and probably also because they do have some archaic features, they are sometimes still referred to as Homo heidelbergensis. But the DNA says otherwise. Without further evidence, these proto-Neanderthals are where our exploration begins. But first, a rapid-fire Neanderthal bio. They likely split from the human lineage between 700 and 500,000 years ago. They lived from at least 435,000 years ago to sometimes between 40 and 30,000 years ago. They were shorter than modern humans, but had a more muscular and denser skeleton. Picture a 5'6" version of the Terminator, but without the need for a gym membership. Neanderthals have a wider pelvis compared to dainty modern humans. They have a brain size comparable to modern humans and very often larger at about 1,500 cubic centimeters. They have long and low skulls. They rock thick, rounded brow ridges, have large eye sockets and a larger, broader nose than modern humans, develop more robust jawbones and teeth, lack a chin, mostly. They lived off the land as traditional hunter-gatherers, and they lived in complex social groups similar to modern humans. It's true that rather than journeying out of Africa, Neanderthals emerged in Eurasia. Yet their movement throughout Eurasia hints at a dynamic and complex history. Because the site known as Cima de los Huesos, aka the Pit of Bones, contained not only the oldest fossil evidence, but DNA evidence as well, this is where all began the story of Homo Neanderthalensis. But first, the pitfalls of integrating data into a grand narrative. Many prehistoric sites represent a single point in time. Some have multiple occupations separated by thousands or tens of thousands of years. Discovered sites are a result of discovery bias, i.e., caves are well explored, while open air sites are less sought after. And caves preserve fossils and DNA, while fossils and DNA degrade much faster at open air sites. Sites on this map are subject to my bias. I tried to research sites that covered a wide range of geographic, climatic, cultural, and temporal elements. There are many sites that are not included here, mainly because I wanted to release this video in 2024 and not 2034. One Neanderthal population can be responsible for multiple sites. This is especially true for sites that only contain stone artifacts. DNA represented sites are a little more cut and dry. Connecting multiple sites on a map with an arrow is often possible thanks to DNA or stone artifact tool styles. But even this should be considered an approximation. Paths between points are definitely best guesses. Even high coverage DNA sequencing only gives a general idea of migration and life history patterns. Evolutionary anthropologist and geneticist K. Proofer and his team explained it better than I can when they said, quote, "Clearly the real population history is likely to have been even more complex. For example, most cases of gene flow are likely to have occurred intermittently, often in both directions and across a geographic range." End quote. On the other hand, when fossils, DNA, isotopic analysis, and stone artifacts are integrated together, the life of Neanderthals can be explored in surprising detail. If placed in time and space, the connection and migratory paths between these heartbeats of Neanderthal populations aren't readily apparent. The nuclear DNA from Atapuerca provides a reasonable starting point. Here's 3 details to keep in mind about Neanderthals. 1. They periodically migrated out of a central population into the rest of Eurasia. These pulses of migrations populated and repopulated much of Eurasia. 2. For a number of reasons, it was not uncommon for local Neanderthal populations to die out. 3. Four major waves of Neanderthals populated or repopulated Eurasia from about 430,000 to 60,000 years ago. I identify these waves as follows. Wave 1, ProtoNeanderthals. Wave 2, early Neanderthals. Wave 3, classic Neanderthals. And Wave 4, classic/terminal Neanderthals. Combining what is known from DNA, the location and dates of sites, the style of stone tools, isotopic analysis, faunal remains, and flora evidence allows for a broadly stroked picture of Neanderthal migrations. Where one field is weak in data, another can pick up the slack. For example, where a lack of DNA is unable to indicate how closely individuals from different sites are related, the style in which stone tools were made hints at the cultural associations and time when these people lived. Extracting DNA from Neanderthal remains allows scientists to map relationships between populations and between individuals in a population. It doesn't hurt that DNA preserves much better in the milder climate of many regions in Eurasia compared to much of Africa. Using the style of stone tools at many of these sites, anthropologists and archaeologists can better determine if populations from different sites were associated with each other culturally. Even when these and many other elements are combined to construct possible scenarios, there remains a large amount of uncertainty. And yet, these scenarios, based on the available evidence, offer us a more accurate insight into the minds and lives of Neanderthals than a narrative based on modern presumptions. This evidence allows us to reconstruct general patterns of each wave of Neanderthal migrations. As is always the case, the further back in time one reaches, the less evidence is found. In the case of the Proto-Neanderthals, the earliest specimen oddly produced DNA evidence. The DNA sequenced from Proto-Neanderthals was low coverage, but it still provides valuable information. The rest of the sites in this group are limited to bone, teeth, or stone remains. The earliest hominin population on the Neanderthal branch inhabited northern Spain. Between 430 and 400,000 years ago, a hominin population migrated into southeast England. Some argue this population from Swanscombe, England, was actually a late surviving Homo erectus, or Heidelbergensis population. If you watched my previous video on Homo erectus migrations, you will know this is a possibility since an amazing track of human footprints in Habsburg, England date between 900,000 to a million years ago. It's impossible to say for sure, but it seems unlikely that a single isolated population was able to survive for 500 to 600,000 years. Northwest of Swanscombe, in Pontynuad, Wales, a Neanderthal site is dated to 225,000 years ago. The same question can be asked of the temporal relationship between these two sites. How likely is it that the Pontynuad population are descendants of the Swanscombe population that lived 175 years before them? It's possible, but without DNA evidence, we can't know for sure. It's just as likely that the Pontynuad population represents a younger migration of Neanderthals that entered England thousands and thousands of years after the Swanscombe people disappeared. We know that Proto-Neanderthals made their way to Eastern Europe by 290,000 years ago. A partial jawbone of a young child, as well as teeth from an older adult, attest to the presence of Proto-Neanderthals at the site of Balanica, Serbia. It should be noted that between this Serbian site and the possible ancestral site in northern Spain, many Proto-Neanderthal sites likely disintegrated under the weight of time are yet to be discovered, or I failed to account for them. By 255,000 years ago, Proto-Neanderthals found themselves at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. In Qesem, Israel, stone tool evidence indicates a population that thrived from at least 255,000 years ago to 207,000 years ago. The relationship between the Balanica population and the one found in Kesem is interesting. When the tools of each site are compared, archaeologists and paleoanthropologists concluded they are made in the same style and use the same method of fabrication. In essence, these tools were made by populations that at some point in time shared the same culture or at the very least encountered each other for a bit. While there is not a lot of evidence for the kind of life Proto-Neanderthals lived, what is available indicates a diversity of experiences. From the mountainous regions of northern Spain, English coasts, Serbian hills, to the mild or downright hot existence in the Near East, even Proto-Neanderthals found themselves living in extremely diverse environments. From 435,000 years ago to around 130,000 years ago, genetic evidence of Neanderthals is essentially absent. But this doesn't mean Neanderthals disappeared from the Eurasian landscape. Both fossils and stone tools indicate they were very much surviving in Europe and even modern day Israel. Because genetic data is dense with information, I'm going to concentrate on the specimens which DNA was extracted from. With DNA, broad migration and demographic patterns can be established. In future videos, I'll double back and explore some of the other populations from this period who did not leave DNA evidence behind, but are just as fascinating. The most ancient of these, what I am calling early Neanderthals, is a specimen known as EPIL4 from the same Atapuerca Mountains where the Proto-Neanderthals were discovered. EPIL4 is special because his DNA did not come from bones or teeth. This DNA was scooped from the soil itself. The designation EPIL4 actually refers to the soil layer where the DNA was found. This layer is dated to about 120,000 years ago. Next in line is a male from Germany that is referred to as HST. HST is dated to 124,000 years ago. EPIL4 and HST are the only individuals that have been assigned to the NA1 haplogroup, which split from the Proto-Neanderthal haplogroup about 300,000 years ago. Sometime before 124,000 years ago, the HST branch split off from the EPIL4 population and eventually landed in Germany. The rest of the Neanderthals fall under the umbrella of the NA2 haplogroup. I'll return to the significance of NA2 in my next series. For now, just know that NA2 branched from NA at the same time as NA1 about 300,000 years ago. The next oldest individuals are ladies SCI-4A from Belgium and Denisova 5, or the Alti Neanderthal, from the Russian tundra. Denisova 5 and SCI-4A also belong to an exclusive haplogroup, haplogroup NE. At some point before 120,000 years ago, this branch split from the NA2 population, and one group landed in Belgium, while a subgroup migrated over 3,000 miles into the Altai Mountains of Russia. Denisova 5 is special because from her comes one of the 3 high-coverage Neanderthal genomes in existence. Plus, she's the oldest individual with a high-coverage genome. All partial Neanderthal DNA recovered from other individuals are compared to Denisova 5 for this reason. The rest of the Neanderthal populations reside under the NA2A haplotype, but only one of the specimens falls under what I consider early Neanderthals. Na2A is the counterpart to Ne. It splinters further into Nm and Nl. Specimen S5000 is the most ancient of the Nm group, Nm1 specifically. S5000 is represented from a tooth that comes from a newborn baby of unknown sex. Found in Poland, the 116,000-year-old is the only member of the NM1 haplogroup. This indicates sometimes before 116,000 years ago, this population split from the NM mother population and remained mostly isolated. All these individuals, EPIL4, HST, Denisova 5, SCI-4A, and S5000, represent dead-end lineages. Their haplogroups disappeared from the record by 110,000 years ago. This marks a population collapse in Neanderthals across many regions in Eurasia. I'll explore the likely reasons for this in future videos. However, all evidence indicates when these groups disappeared, their homeland remained vacant for a period of time. Before I move on, I should say that other early Neanderthal sites that failed to offer genetic evidence likely belong to these haplogroups. For example, stone and fossil evidence put Neanderthals in Karen, Turkey from 185 to 160,000 years ago. I'm willing to bet this population would have belonged to haplogroup NE and broke off with the Denisovan 5 population that eventually migrated to Russia. The same may be true for Neanderthals found in Byzantine Iran about 120,000 years ago. The third wave of Neanderthals fall under the NM2 and NL haplogroups. It fell to the members of these two haplogroups to repopulate the vacated regions of Eurasia beginning about 100,000 years ago. Remember that the last member of Wave 2, the baby S5000, had a haplogroup of NM1. Specimen EPIL3, dated to 100,000 years ago, is the most ancient third wave member in my dataset. Two things are remarkable about the female EPIL3 DNA. First, this individual was sequenced from soil found in the same northern Spanish cave as EPIL4. Second, EPIL3 is more related to Wave 3 Neanderthals, almost all of which are non-Spanish, than it is related to EPIL4, even though they were sequenced from the same cave soil. This indicates that EPIL3 was a member of a European population that repopulated the Spanish cave thousands of years after the EPIL4 group had disappeared. In contrast, EPIIL2, also female, sequenced from the same soil but a younger layer of the cave and dated to 79,000 years old, appears to be an ancestor of the EPIL3 group. This region of the Atapuerca Mountains contained the earliest identified Neanderthal DNA, while DNA between this time and 120,000 years ago hasn't been located. It's likely that this area was at least intermittently occupied by Neanderthals during these years. In my video on Homo erectus, I point out that about 860,000 years ago, the Homo antecessor TD-6 lived in this very same mountain region. It's not out of the realm of possibility that a similar hominin species is a direct ancestor to the ProtoNeanderthals. Just as importantly, it seems that this region of northern Spain and southern France were regions with conditions that suited the near constant presence of Neanderthals. When EPIL3 split from the NM mother population, it wasn't alone. All classic and terminal Neanderthals descended from this population. And using the molecular clock, genetic evidence indicates these populations that end up across Eurasia all split from a mother population during a period of about 110 to 100,000 years ago. Two more members of the NM2 haplogroup are Mesmaskaya 1, dated to 70,000 years ago, and is a newborn of unknown sex, and the 6-year-old girl Mesmaskaya 3, dated to 100,000 years ago. The Mes1 and Mes3 populations weren't directly related, but belonged to groups that were more closely related to each other than to other populations. The position of Gibraltar 1, an adult female in the Neanderthal family tree, is not certain, but models show she is likely a member of the NM2 haplogroup. Her date is also not certain, but she is at most 100,000 years old and may be as young as 50,000 years old. The most recent addition to this clade is the adventurously named Thorin. Likely retired, the elder man called Southeast France home. Thorin, like the rest of these individuals, represents a group that split from a mother population 100,000 years ago. Thorin himself lived 50,000 years ago and is likely the last member of the NM2 population. Reversing way back to when NM split from the NA2A haplogroup, the other surviving lineage was the NL lineage. The last of the classic Neanderthals are found here, as well as the descendant terminal Neanderthals. When the Chagrascaya individuals split from the superpopulation 100,000 years ago, they went big and followed in the footsteps of Denisova V by wandering all the way to the Altai Russia region. One of these individuals, Chagrascaya VIII, is the second Neanderthal to have its genome sequenced at high coverage. Once reaching the Altai Mountains, a subset of the group split and moved to the Okladnikov cave, where the genetic remains of a 9-year-old boy, identified here as Oklad I, were found. These populations were closely related, but remained mostly isolated. As the main migrating group made its way into the region, at least one woman split and went in a different direction, and migrated to the world-renowned Denisova cave. Here she would go on to gain intimate knowledge of a Denisovan man and birth Denny, the now famous Neanderthal-Denisovan hybrid. Chag A, Oklad A, and Denny's Neanderthal mom are the only identified individuals that belong to the NL haplogroup. If we take into account non-genetic sites for this time period, several more regions where Neanderthals migrated can be identified. 4 sites point to a Neanderthal presence on the northwest coast of Europe and even on the British Isles. South of that, multiple sites attest to a migration route that led to the southwest coast of Portugal. To the east, one site shows at least a small presence of Neanderthals on the Italian peninsula. And finally, a substantial number of sites show that Neanderthals just can't stay away from the Levant, right on the doorstep of Africa. Perhaps their legend has it that that's the place to go to meet an exotic partner. The emergence of NL1 led to the last members of the classic Neanderthals, as well as most of the terminal Neanderthals. Like their ancient ancestors before, it seems much of the NL populations collapsed from their initial expansion 100,000 years ago to 58,000 years ago. Anthropologists estimate that most Neanderthals after 70,000 years ago originate from one or several closely related populations from a single region. After NL populations disappeared, the ancestors of Neanderthals, like SD 1253 in Spain and VI 33.19 of modern-day Croatia, migrated from this mother population and once again repopulated much of modern-day Europe. VI 33.19 is the third individual whose genome has produced a high-coverage analysis. Quick sidebar. Having 3 high-coverage genomes doesn't sound like a lot, but when you throw in the low-coverage ProtoNeanderthal genome, they act as anchors of Neanderthal DNA change through time. You can look at it in various ways: 435, 120, 55, and 50,000 years ago, NA, NE, NL, and NL1 haplogroups. These genomes are spread out enough through time to allow researchers to use them as a ruler to place low-coverage genomes in time and lineage. If a genetic fragment of one individual is closer to Denisova V than to Chagrascaya VIII, we know that it split from Chag VIII's lineage over 30,000 years before Chag VIII lived. The more identical a genome is to Denisova V, the closer the split to it. Beyond using these high-coverage genomes as reference points, the DNA fragments of all the individuals with low-coverage genomic analysis can be compared to each other. This allows researchers to create a genetic tree in the same way you might put a puzzle together by comparing the individual pieces. When observing Neanderthal sites on a map, it's important to keep in mind that just because the remains of individuals are found in the same cave doesn't mean they're related or belong to the same ancestral population or haplogroup. A good demonstration of this is the genetic relationships between several individuals from the Mezhmeskaya cave in southern Russia. Although Mez 3, Mez 2, and Mez 1 are all found in the same cave, Mez 2 is much more closely related to other late Neanderthals. From the perspective of Mez 2, Mez 3 is downright ancient. It's crazy to think about the fact that Mez 2 is closer in time to you and me than it is to the 100,000-year-old Mez 3, and even Mez 1 is 26,000 years older than Mez 2. Mez 2 represents a member of the last wave of Neanderthal expansion after older populations like Mez 1 and Mez 3 disappeared. Like Denisova 5, Chag 8, and the Mesh trio, there are many other examples where individuals from the same site or region are not related and lived millennia apart. The last survivals of this final wave are the terminal Neanderthals. Individuals such as the female Z4-1514 in central France, Mez 2, Q56-1 in Belgium, who's also a female, the male Spy 94A from Belgium, and many more not represented by DNA are all part of the final Neanderthal chapter. Here I consider the terminal Neanderthals to be 48,000 years old or younger. Just how young is an interesting question that will be considered in later videos. These migratory waves as depicted are only possible routes that Neanderthals might have taken, but several certainties do exist. In the Russian tundra, you might ask how it's known that Chagrskaya and Oklenikov populations weren't simply descendants of the Alti Neanderthal population. Doesn't this seem more likely than multiple 2,000-mile-long migrations? Two lines of evidence point to Neanderthals making this long journey at least twice. The Alti Neanderthal population left stone tools made in the Levallois Mousterian style, while the later populations used a younger and unrelated method. DNA also points to the Chagrskaya and Oklenikov populations as being very distantly related to the Alti Neanderthal. Dots on a map don't reveal this information. That's why it's so important to dig deeper through artifacts, bones, teeth, and genetic remains to better understand the experience of Neanderthals through hundreds of thousands of years. From an even broader perspective from Neanderthal migration routes, genetic diversity was lost with each successive collapse of the ProtoNeanderthal, early Neanderthal, and classic Neanderthal populations. It's true that after each collapse, expansion and repopulation of Eurasia occurred, but each time, repopulation occurred with a fragment of the previous genetic diversity. Ultimately, the terminal Neanderthals are the product of this stepwise reduction in genetic diversity. It makes you wonder if the Alti Neanderthal would recognize someone like Spy 94A, who was 82,000 years younger. How alien would these two individuals seem to one another? Would the main out of Africa sapiens recognize the differences between the Alti Neanderthal and Spy 94A? Did early sapiens witness terminal Neanderthals slowly disappear, or were they ghosts in the distance, little more than legend? Up to this point, I've been talking about Neanderthals as points on a map, with some background information added to better understand their general patterns of living. But as the different styles of lithic evidence alludes to, Neanderthal groups lived in different times, different environments, different ecologies, and developed different cultures. This video series will continue to explore the unique and collective experiences of Neanderthals throughout Eurasia and throughout time. In the next video, we'll take a deeper dive into Neanderthal DNA. Thanks for listening. If you found value or learned anything in this video, I'd appreciate a like or a subscribe.